Hey class, I'm just going to make a couple of short videos for you about The Rivals by Richard Brinsley Sheridan, since we're not going to talk about it as a group in class. You did some good work on your question answers that you sent in, and here's some of the things that I would sort of point out in class if we were going to have a session just about The Rivals. Okay, so here's video number one. Video number one is, why does your introduction say this is a laughing comedy? Aren't all comedies supposed to be laughing comedies? We said that comedy's funny. That's one of the things that makes it a comedy. Well, here's what it means. So we read Shakespeare and then we read Richard Brinsley Sheridan's The Rivals, and they're separated in time by about a couple hundred years. A lot of stuff happened in those couple hundred years. After Shakespeare, a few years after he had died, England has a really difficult period of political instability and civil war, which you may have heard about in other classes or read about in some other books. But this results in the King of England at the time, Charles I, being forced off of the throne. He's imprisoned and beheaded, and England comes under a Commonwealth government led by Oliver Cromwell, who's a Puritan and not a very nice guy. And Oliver Cromwell does many things, including close all the theaters in England and outlaw theater, and also cancel Christmas and do terrible things. So for 18 years, from 1642 to 1660, during the time that there was no king or queen on the English throne, during this Commonwealth period with this grouchy guy named Cromwell, there was no new theater and no new comedy. When it ends in 1660 with the return of a king, Charles II, the son of the king who was murdered, one of the many things that he does once he gets rid of the Commonwealth government is to open the theaters and announce lots of parties and Christmas and birthdays and good things like that. And because England had had this grouchy puritanical period, they backlashed against it by having comedy and all kinds of stories that were really, really naughty. So in the stories that are told in the theater during the period when we get a king back, the period called the Restoration, when the king is restored and all kinds of other things are restored in England, in that period we get comedies where people do really naughty things. They're all having sex with everybody, they're all cheating everybody, they're all out just for themselves and telling lies, and nobody gets punished for doing the wrong thing, and people who are bad are hilarious, end of story. It's pretty funny, but it's also really extreme. That only lasts for about 20, 30 years before people kind of get a little over the naughty stories. And the pendulum then swings the other way, as happens often, and we get a period of time in the early 1700s when everybody in a comedy is as sweet as they could be. Everybody's nice, and everybody says exactly what they mean, and nobody is a liar, and everybody is very sentimental, meaning they value emotions and honesty and their feelings over everything else. And that's popular for a little while, but then people get bored of that because it's really not very funny. Then we get the period of Richard Brinsley Sheridan, so later in the 1700s. And he is responsible for, he's one of the writers, responsible for what is called at the time the return of laughing comedy. We're going to have comedies again that are actually laugh out loud funny. But here's the difference. We get the jokes, we get people who are kind of dressing up and being naughty and telling lies, which is funny, but we don't get the really extreme naughtiness that we had in the Restoration. So in laughing comedies, we have a little bit of sentiment, a little bit of sweetness and feeling and honesty, and good people get rewarded and bad people get punished, not like in the Restoration. But it's funny, not like in the sentimental period that followed the naughty Restoration. So it's kind of like a medium brand of comedy, a little bit naughty and a little bit sweet. That's where this play lands. So some of the characters in The Rivals were telling lies, but in the end, the lies they told turned out to sort of be true. And people who didn't treat each other honestly and who we didn't like, they sort of get their comeuppance in the play. And people who we think, well, their hearts are in the right place, they end up getting what they want in the play. That's what laughing comedy means in this context.